You are the co-founder and CEO of Crimson Education.
Manhattan to me feels like capitalism cranked on steroids, like capitalism cubed. It feels almost like a meme of capitalism. My first year, we did 300K in sales. By the end of Harvard, we were doing 5 million per year. Alpha School promises to get through all that content in 2 hours rather than 7. When I finished Harvard that next year, I was basically on a plane every week, opening up Crimson markets in Thailand and Russia and Vietnam and Singapore. So it's about 40% academics, 30% extracurriculars and leadership, 30% essays and interviews. And, last year we did just over 300 million in sales, New Zealand dollars.
Just go and do it and see what happens.
Ideas are worth like jack shit, absolute jack shit. Like if you can't execute, there's nothing.
Just take that initiative to actually take whatever crazy ideas that they might have and just try to see what comes of it.
Don't be afraid of ambition. Chase it, love it, wrap your arms around it and say it out loud.
New Zealanders don't know any better. They will just get up and give it a shot. That's why we were first to get to the top of Mount Everest.
Go to dream that ultimate dream. Like, what is it that you ultimately want to do? And it's all achievable.
All right, Jamie, thank you for joining us on TechMates.
It's a blast. Pleasure to be with you guys.
Great. Yeah. And you're in New York today, right? That's where you're kind of based at the moment?
Yes, mainly in New York. I just got back from a spicy trip to Brazil yesterday.
Spicy trip?
Yes. Our Crimson team has been there for like about 7 years or so, and I haven't actually been back on the ground for a while. And it's a really good market for study abroad. So just there for the weekend.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. Well, I guess Jamie can be introduced as the least qualified person that I've ever met. He only has like 5 degrees from Ivy League University instead of all 8. So something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. We usually want to inspire people from New Zealand to kind of think big, but that doesn't really sound impressive. So I don't know if we should kind of continue with this interview. But no, I mean, in all seriousness, we're super happy to have you on. You are the co-founder and CEO of Crimson Education, huge education company that we love to talk a little bit more about. But usually, what we do is we kind of give a bit of background on founders who are coming out of the New Zealand ecosystem or part of the New Zealand ecosystem to inspire others to think about becoming entrepreneurs. And we usually start by going back all the way to kind of where you grew up, how you grew up, and what made you become an entrepreneur. So would love to start kind of at the beginning. Like what was your childhood like and your upbringing?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up with my mum, Paula, and my grandparents in like a 3-generational home. And I think growing up, my mum was always running her business, growing her property management company. And so from a young age, I sort of saw her hustling all the time, picking up client calls at wacky hours. I'd be doing my homework in her meetings around Auckland. And so I guess growing up, I was always really exposed to business. And saying that, I always thought that I was just doing my academic stuff, doing some sciences. Maybe I'd do medicine at the University of Auckland. And so I really had no connection to business emotionally. I didn't really think it was a thing that I would do. When I was about 16, I picked up A-level economics and I began to see really how cool like financial markets were, investing, economics, things like this. And I was also doing a young enterprise scheme and I was having a bit of experience there with business. But it really wasn't until I applied to all these US and UK schools when I was about 17 and got into them. And all these people were asking me about how I'd gotten into schools like Harvard and if I could help them, that I began to build Crimson. And initially it was really a bit of a side hustle, really helping Kiwi kids that, I just wanted to give some support to before I began at Harvard. And I kind of stumbled onto Crimson in many ways. But by about that time, I began to get really curious about business, both investing in companies in terms of public equities and also building them too as an entrepreneur. And I think from about 18 onwards, I became pretty obsessed with business building and, I've been kind of hardcore building Crimson ever since.
But Jamie, if we sort of like go back a little bit. So what did your mom kind of like, instill in you that education was important? Or how did you like, what was it like for you growing up in that? Were your grandparents important to you and kind of like shaping how you thought about that?
Yeah, totally. So my mum was a big believer in education. She did an MBA degree, a law degree, a commerce degree, and she was a chartered accountant. And she sort of said to me early on in my career that, or rather in my education, that education's a super high stakes part of your life that really, whatever happens to you, you always have your education. And there's an aspect of sort of self-reliance and self-determination, I think, that she associates with education in general. From a young age, I guess, I was always really excited by school. And I think I began pretty early on to associate school and academics the same way maybe a Kiwi kid associates rugby or sports, something like this. And so it was like the thing that I loved doing, the thing that I sort of associated myself with. And I think my mom always cheered me on and encouraged it. Certainly before the age of like 12, she was very hands-on. Like she would like teach me Latin and history and all these things. But I think I was pretty self-motivated, especially kind of heading into high school years. And I sort of just had the sense that, academics was the thing that would kind of take me somewhere. And so it was a big deal in our family. And I think as I went through high school, it became progressively more high stakes as I learned about these US admissions processes to schools like Harvard, where everything that I was doing kind of counted towards this long-term goal I had of getting into one of these great universities. So yeah, I would say our family, for like a Caucasian Kiwi family, was pretty high intensity on the education side. And in many ways, my childhood was much more like probably like a Chinese kid growing up, with some intense academic parents than your typical Kiwi laid back mum. So it was kind of a special Kiwi experience.
Interesting. What kinds of things did you do besides academics? Did you do a bunch of like other extracurriculars? Were there any kind of things that were particularly interesting to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I tried a bunch of stuff. I tried basketball unsuccessfully, but I also played like tennis and hockey and other sports. And tennis and hockey were the things that I really kind of went deep on. Tennis was really one of my main loves going through school. So I'd play tennis a lot, play for my school teams, competitive teams, different tournaments and stuff. I also love debate. I love Model United Nations, which I kind of got into later in high school. I love creative writing, and I was really involved with a lot of different extracurriculars. I think in high school, though, I never really saw myself as like a leader. I was more like just doing my academic things, doing some activities. So the idea of like public speaking or being like the head of the school government or whatever, I never really saw that as something that sort of fitted me. I was much more my academic swim lane. And then I think as I went through high school, debate became a big part of things. And I think near the end of high school, I started to get a bit more comfortable with leadership and building clubs and stuff. And so I launched like a student newspaper, and I launched like this business and a bunch of other clubs for things like Youth Against Drink Driving. And that became my first exposure to sort of leadership and coordinating people and running an organization.
Well, and when was the first time that you learned there was like, I mean, I assumed you had known there was universities in New Zealand, but at what point the idea of like going abroad for university enter your mind?
So I actually remember the moment very distinctively because I was on a train from Glennis out to Kings in Otahu, and I sat next to this guy called Ben Cornfeld. And, to me, this guy was like sort of an all black because he was the best academic kid at Kings. He was the dux of the school. He'd won all of these different Olympiad medals, top in the world awards in his academics. And he was, kind of like the big brother, sort of figure. And so he told me on the train out to school that I should really think about not only applying to New Zealand schools, but also these, American schools. And he just gotten into Yale, and he was telling me about the process and said, that he applied quite last minute, but if he could go back, he would have started to think about it from my age. And so I think that was sort of the initial seed.
How old were you?
I was 13. So, yeah, it was great timing. And that kind of really lit a fire into me because before I did all this academic stuff sort of out of the thrill of the chase, and I enjoyed it. And I think from that point, there was a real purpose behind everything that I was doing that would really kind of sync to my career. And I went to Columbia with my mum when I was 15. She took me around campus, and it felt like a kind of, academic Disneyland of sorts. And it was super inspiring. And I kind of came back to New Zealand fired up by that. Yeah, each new year just added more and more stuff in this kind of endless pursuit of trying to get into these schools. And it was really fun actually, but I definitely put a lot of pressure on myself, I think, in that last year in particular, as I was kind of applying to all these schools.
Interesting. And as you kind of like thought about these schools, and did you think I just want to get into a school and that's kind of the achievement in itself, or did you think, oh, I want to go to, I don't know, Princeton because they have a low, professor to student ratio and they're undergrad focused, or I want to go to Harvard for this reason? Like, or do you have a specific, or was it more just like, I just want to get into an Ivy League, or I want to get into a top 10 school? Like, how did you think about that?
So the way I kind of stumbled upon this is in high school, I was like reading these like Wikipedia profiles of people like political leaders, business leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs. And I kept discovering that these guys had gone to these, great schools. And I was like, very, very interesting. It seems like, in order to kind of break into these worlds, particularly investing in Wall Street and finance, this could be useful. And so I actually kind of like, I had the Ben inspiration from that train conversation. And then I kept seeing these examples of interesting people, that had come, like, Zuckerberg was building Facebook, and that was a big deal at the time, or like Evan Spiegel and Snapchat from Stanford. And I kept hearing these university names, and it began to sort of seep into my brain a little bit that getting into the schools would equal opportunity. For me, what that looked like was a bit ambiguous at the start of high school. Maybe it was medicine again. But I think from the age of about 15, 16, I began to kind of think about investing in Wall Street and, becoming like a hedge fund investor or whatever that meant at the time. And so I think I began to see sort of the universities as this launch pad to, this compelling opportunity. And maybe it was a little bit ambiguous exactly what I was striving for, but it felt like that was the very clear direction.
Did you know what that meant? like being a hedge fund investor or being an adult? Like, did you understand what that actually meant? Or you just like, why did you gravitate towards that?
I read this book called What They Teach You at Harvard Business School, which I picked up at a secondhand bookstore in Hamilton. And I was just reading it kind of on the way back up to Auckland. And, it was sort of recounting what it was like in the Harvard MBA program. And it was a journalist who had sort of, gone around and interviewed all his classmates who were doing things like private equity and banking. And so I began to kind of build a bit of intuition for what this finance world was like. And I love math, and I didn't really know what I could do with math at the time. But then when I began to read about finance and investing, I sort of realized that actually this career, it seems pretty high stakes, exciting, adrenaline filled, lucrative. This could be good. And so I think I began to get a clearer idea of it. I think I was still a bit hazy on what a hedge fund was until I actually met with the late Julian Robertson as part of the Robertson Scholarship interview process. And in preparation for that, I was reading about his background and story, and I didn't know what this hedge fund thing really meant. And so I was kind of going deep on studying, okay, what is shorting? How do these hedge funds work? Why are they different to like a bank? And so I would say I was murky in the beginning of high school. Then by the end of high school, I had a pretty clear sense of this. And certainly by the time I was heading off to Harvard, I was kind of like hell bent on this mission of getting into Wall Street.
Why was that interesting? Like that, these are like such abstract things. Like, why was that interesting to you?
I think it seemed like an intellectual gladiatorial arena or something where, these sharp guys from around the world would come along, they'd compete with their minds in this sort of like pseudo video game. And in doing so, you learn about the world, you learn about different companies, but it was sort of an expression of creativity. It seemed like, it seemed kind of like a thrilling adrenaline, high speed chase. So I think there was some aspect of this. And I also just loved economics. And it felt like, the industry that I could best use economics. I couldn't see myself becoming like a professor straight away in economics. But it seemed like if I use these economic skills, maybe in investing, that'd be quite helpful. And, probably the first like serious heavyweight guy that I met in my life, American guy, was probably Julian Robertson. And, I just began to get attached to sort of this idea of, what he had built, how he had built it, the framework for analysis that he had. It seemed compelling to me.
So what was this first year in Harvard like? Like, what was the experience? Was it everything you kind of imagined and dreamed of from an academic perspective?
Wait. So wait, hold on. But where did you get in? I guess maybe let's rewind a little bit before. Where did you all the schools where did you apply? Where did you get in? And then
So I applied to schools like Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Columbia, Wharton, and Duke. And I got into all of those schools. So it was a good sweep. And I also applied to random schools in like New Zealand and Australia and stuff. Mainly the goal was to get into the top US schools. I was considering going to Cambridge, but I think ultimately America seemed more ambitious, more entrepreneurial. And in the UK, you would just do one degree and focus on a singular domain. And I kind of like the idea of these US schools where you could try a bunch of different things. And I also like the idea of a school where every single person there, had these deep passions, but they were quite broad. And so I could just imagine sort of making lots of friends with very different interests to my own and that being quite fun. So that was, I guess, what drew me to Harvard over some of the other schools like Wharton, which is very hardcore on the finance side, as you know. So I think that was it. And then I guess to answer your question, Hendrik, when I got to Harvard, I felt like I had entered into a new universe where I was liberated. And what I mean by that is, I think in high school, there was this like sense of the tall poppy syndrome phenomena a little bit where, I was very ambitious, maybe too ambitious. And, I was sort of pushing against this quite chill, relaxed environment, even at my great high school. And, I love my high school. But it felt like there was something unusual where like I was really, itching to get out there into the world, and education seemed very high stakes to me. And there was only a couple of kids in my high school that probably felt that way as well. When I got to Harvard, every single kid had these crazy ambitions. And I remember this stark first week where I met this kid, Danny, and he told me that he wanted to become the US president. And at the time, I thought it was kind of nuts, this 18-year-old guy telling me this. And, he declared to me quite confidently that he was the head of the student government in his high school, and he was going to go to Harvard and he was going to become the president of the States. And I thought, this is just like crazy. And I kept meeting these guys. I met this girl, Catherine, who was very good at statistics. She told me she wanted to launch a hedge fund. And it was again and again and again, these Americans with these big dreams. And I was so used subconsciously to kind of bottling up my ambitions in New Zealand and it being kind of weird or quirky. And so when I got to Harvard, it really did feel like this great liberation. Every single meeting, every professor, and speed and excitement was appreciated. So I loved it, and I jumped into some really challenging economics and math classes, and I met these world-class professors, and it was just all go from day one. And I just loaded my schedule up with crazy classes, and I was joining all these different finance clubs and building Crimson at night, and it was just like a baptism by fire. And it was very intense because I was like doing all the classes, doing Crimson, but I loved every minute of it.
Were you part of any final clubs?
No, I did go along to the to some of them. I went along to the SPE, but I don't drink any alcohol, and so at some points, in the process, you kind of have to either commit or not. And this is not really for me. But very nice people, and a lot of my good buddies are in those finals clubs.
Interesting.
So you felt more kind of among your peers and could suddenly start dreaming big and kind of, saying out loud what you actually wanted to do with your life and your career.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, I was sort of quite, inspired by this ambition. It felt like the other thing is very interesting. High school felt like you couldn't be too ambitious because that was frowned upon, but also it felt very zero sum because you ultimately have to compete with your classmates to get into these universities. Harvard felt you could be loud with your ambitions, but it also wasn't zero sum basically because there were so many, things you could be striving for, from academia to, getting a hedge fund role. And there are so many shots on goal in different organizations that you're not really kind of competing with your classmate all that much. Maybe if you're both trying to get a job at McKinsey, maybe, but even then they can take a lot of people. I no longer felt the zero sum competition. I felt it was more just like a race against myself. And that was pretty awesome. And, I was sort of going down quite a different track to many of my classmates with my hedge fund stuff and also with Crimson. I had these great swim lanes, loving it.
Jamie, why do you think the US, and I don't know if US is unique, but yeah, why do you think there was such a difference between what you experienced? Now, obviously you were in high school and going to college, and I'm sure like most US high schools are similar to yours, but like just from a more macro perspective, you've lived in a lot of places now, you've seen a lot of different people, you kind of older now. Do you have any like thoughts around like, I guess, why New Zealand has this tall poppy thing, and is there ways to change it? Or maybe is it a good thing for a small country to have that kind of thing? Or do you think it holds the country back? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I actually think Manhattan, where I live right now, and New Zealand have this wonderful contrast, almost fall to each other. And I think they both have their pros and cons. So take New Zealand. It's a very egalitarian country. Everyone's pretty equal in feeling. You respect your common person. It doesn't matter what you're doing. There's a lot of mutual respect there. And whoever you are in life, your life isn't so radically different. Obviously, it can be quite different, but it's not the same as India or something, between like the Ambanis and people who are unable to feed themselves to quite that extent. So I think New Zealand has this, and also generally it's people that are sorting for lifestyle in terms of moving to New Zealand in the first place. And there's an element of sort of a pace of life as well there. It's not quite island time, right? Like Hawaii or something, but it's also, it's a bit more relaxed. So I think there's plenty of benefits to that. It's a very, I think, psychologically safe place to grow up. Then I think on the flip side, you've got Manhattan. And Manhattan to me feels like capitalism cranked on steroids, like capitalism cubed. Feels like a Super Mario game where you run around chasing the gold coins and, everyone's running around 24/7 and it's like a nutty little inferno. So I think, the problem with that in Manhattan is, to some degree, there's an element of superficiality maybe to the society. And there's also a sense that, people always joke that often in New York, you first describe who you are by saying what you do. Whether in New Zealand, often you'll have a conversation, you won't even talk about what your job is, for like a whole meeting. In fact, it's kind of weird to talk about work sometimes. So I think that really epitomizes this difference. So I think when I first got to America and I first got to Harvard, I felt liberated by that raw ambition. But as I've gotten older, I think it's fair to say that there is pros and cons to these types of intense psyches and probably different flavors of life. I also think that in general, I have a lot of kids from Crimson from all corners of the world. I think if you grow up in Manhattan your entire life, there's an aspect of how it affects a child's psychology, which I think can be damaging sometimes. And I do think that the Kiwi childhood can have a lot of benefits, actually. So overall, I think America is just the most extreme version of capitalism filtering through every part of the society. I think about you go to all these states, there's just like endless fast food chains. You go to these like strip malls. You go to like an emergency care doctor that's going to charge some crazy price owned by some private equity firm down the road. And you have like members clubs, stacked for the only purpose of creating these zones of exclusivity, just to appeal to these people that need to find some difference in a city where like lots of people have theoretical abundance. So it feels almost like a meme of capitalism. And then, I think maybe New Zealand's on the other side of that spectrum. So yeah, I think that's probably my reflections a little bit. And I personally, at this stage of my life, I love mixing it up. I love to be in the New York grind. Then I love to just, it's almost like a cleansing process being in New Zealand. It like purifies my soul of sort of just the capitalist grime. So that's a good one too.
And of the literal grime too.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. New Zealand is much cleaner.
maybe we can talk a little bit more about Crimson and the early days. So you said what started it was basically other people asking you, how did you get into Harvard? But maybe talk a little bit more about like how you got started.
Yeah, so going through high school, I had this very bizarre experience where I was reading about what it took to get into these schools. I was buying books like what they teach you at Harvard, the 50 applications that got you into Harvard. And I was like on these online forums and stuff. And it seemed like this incredibly complicated process. Then I'd speak to folks in Auckland and they would generally tell me to like chill out or do less stuff. These extra activities I was doing isn't necessary. A classic example is these A levels. So in my high school, normally you do 3 or 4 A levels. And I was like pretty convinced that if I did a lot of A levels would help me get into all these schools. And I like studying. So I took 10 of these things. And I had all these folks telling me it was kind of like a bit nutty. Now, when I ultimately applied, I got into all of these schools and many of my classmates who are very sharp, who had great achievements, got declined from everywhere. And I kind of realized actually that a lot of this advice that we were getting, a lot of it was just actually wrong. Like it wasn't just neutral, it actually was like damaging, negative advice that would actually decrease your odds if you listen to it. And so I thought this is kind of wacky because getting in is super high leverage, but the advice is really hard to access. And there are all these kind of weird cultural barriers that, make you more likely to quit the process. And so when I began Crimson, I just thought that I had a differentiated point of view about what it takes to bridge a Kiwi education through to these great schools. And I was pretty confident that I could add some value to these students. And so I began running around initially kids from my high school, kids from peer high schools, recruiting tutors that I knew through like Math Olympiad and Model UN and stuff.
So Jamie, just to double click on that. So the insight was you were getting not only neutral information, but like unhelpful information that was preventing kids from getting to these good schools in New Zealand. And so you were like, I've gone through the process. I have peers and I see what kind of peers they are, what they've done. I can actually provide some insights and some inside knowledge for kids who want to get into these schools.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And did you already think of it as a business at that time? Or you were just like, oh, I just want to be helpful?
At the start, I just thought I could be helpful. Pretty quickly, though, I realized that if I was just being helpful everywhere, I would have so many folks coming to me that it was probably challenging. So then I started to charge for it. And I also began to realize that actually, rather than doing it all myself, if I began hiring all these tutors, I can actually serve more students. So I think pretty quickly I figured out that I should deliver this through a more scalable channel. And so I was very happy to help people that needed the help. But I felt like the way to kind of solve the problem went beyond me. And I could probably be like a facilitator for this. So very quickly it evolved into a business. Around the same time, I was interning for the Ice House, and I was going to these like Ice House pitch days where entrepreneurs would come along and pitch their ideas to a room full of investors like Deloitte partners and lawyers and stuff. And a lot of these guys had no revenue, and they had these like slides, but they would raise these like seed rounds. And I thought it was sort of mythical that this guy with no business would be able to make money plucked from the sky from these investors. And it just didn't seem sort of, I don't know, real. Meanwhile, in Crimson, I was sort of pulling in the revenue. I think we did several $100,000 in revenue in our first year. And I thought
700,000.
I said several $100,000. It was 300,000 in our first year was our sales.
Wait, hold on. This is while you're at Harvard?
Yeah. So my first year we did 300K in sales.
While you're at Harvard, you have a business that's pulling in 300K.
Yeah. By the end of Harvard, we were doing 5 million per year.
What?
So the way you did it was basically first you kind of did the tutoring yourself, and then did you kind of give other tutors a manual of like, this is what you need to teach them? That's the way you scaled it?
That's right. So I began recruiting all of these tutors. I would build these packages that had sort of a team of tutors working on different things around a student. And then I would go find all the tutors that the client needs, and I would, match them up and then manage these cases. And so I was sitting on campus at Harvard, so I had access to many of these super sharp kids that had come from all corners of the world with amazing achievement. So if you wanted to become a debate champ, I'd go find the guy who won debating. And if you wanted to be a Math Olympiad medalist, I'd go find the kid who had a Math Olympiad medal. So it was kind of like sitting in the ultimate recruiting zone. And I knew all these guys because I was eating lunch with them, right, and dinner and stuff. And so I was able to kind of find some pretty unique talent. And back then it was like early days Facebook. So I could, find a lot of the students that were a couple of year groups behind us. And I would do events, and it would be very viral amongst their, social media pages and stuff. So they would hear about Crimson quite quickly. So that was kind of how I got some quick traction with no.
So the tutors were all your peer students. That's
right. Yeah. Like, this is kind of funny, but at one point, like all my college roommates were working for Crimson. It was like a serious operation. So we had one guy who was like, we created a video series called Ask a Harvard Student. And we'd get all these questions from the internet, and then we'd have these Harvard kids come in and answer all these questions. And then I'd have like a bunch of the other guys like doing tutoring sessions and stuff. So you'd like come into our dorm room, and it was just like 4 desks, all Crimson operations. It was pretty funny.
Like a sweatshop.
Wait, so what was your, what were you actually selling? Was it, I will help you do your A-level prep, or I will tell you high-level advice about how you should structure your application, or I will kind of tell you what Harvard's like, or like what exactly was the product you were selling?
The product is like a detailed emissions plan for what you need to do each week, each month for your extracurriculars, for your leadership, for your academics, for your subject choice, for your grade targets, what schools you're going to apply to. So all of this game plan, and then all these tutors to help you actually do it. So it'd be a combination of like counseling, consulting, as we call it, and then academic tutoring, the both. And this was actually modeled after my own final phase of high school, where I had tutors for about 5 different subjects, and I was kind of trying to crank the intensity to max. And so I would use tutors to get through like 140 hours of economics in 40 hours.
How'd you find these tutors for yourself?
It was a bit of hustle. I asked my math teacher for recommendations, and she referred me to this like legendary math Olympiad tutor. And then I stumbled across like my science teacher through like a referral from this doctor guy. So it was just a bunch of asking people, who's the best tutor you've heard of, and then I would, kind of like go through and have lessons with them and figure out who was good. And then I assembled this team, and then I would just, see if we had a good vibe. And I realized it was so productive. Like I used to do tutoring on a supplemental basis. And then for say A-level further maths, I essentially learned the whole class with my tutor next to me, which made it way more efficient. And then I was able to get through way more classes. And
how did you do that? Tell me the logistics. So here I'm your tutor. You're you. What are we doing? How do we spend the time? What do we actually do?
You're sitting next to me, and I'm doing further maths practice papers. Then as soon as I'm stuck, I'm like, hey, can you explain this concept to me? And then you're going to give me, guidance as to what I got wrong, and I'm going to get back to my past paper exam. So it's like a 2012 version of GPT, where you are the GPT and I'm doing my homework. And then when I'm stuck, rather than being like, gosh, I have no idea, I can't ask my mum, I don't know who to ask, you're sitting there ready to help. So it wasn't a typical like you're coaching me on the whole curriculum. It was very much like, rather than having this 1 hour of confusion every time I'm confused, I'm just going to ask you, and it'll make the process a lot faster. It also was like a self-discipline thing. I had discipline, but at the same time, if you're sitting right next to me, I can't go and get distracted and play like RuneScape or Call of Duty or something. So it was also like a forced lock-in mechanism.
Interesting. So you basically did you come up with it yourself, or did you how did you? That's a very interesting hack, right? You're like, okay, I gotta get through all these A levels. I'm gonna hack it through a combination of smart person who can enforce discipline and help me when I get stuck. That's kind of clever, right? How'd you come up with that?
I guess from a young age, I had math and English tutoring. Like I did things like Kumon and NumberWorks, and I thought it was it was just so effective compared to going to school. Like in Kumon, I'd get through kind of years ahead of the, what I'd be doing at school. So I'd just go to school and I'd have seen all the stuff before when I was younger. And I thought, if I compare how much I got through in 1 hour with my tutor 101 versus sitting in my school chatting to my friends, it was very different. So I used to sort of almost go to school to eat my lunch and hang out with my buddies, but then the real grind would begin when I got home from school. So yeah, it was, I guess, my own intuition, sort of thinking about the relative efficacy of these two environments. And I was just always asking, what is the bottleneck to getting through the subject? Is it like how many hours they have to learn the content? Is it practice exams? Is it like time in the school schedule? And there were these rules like you can only take 4 A levels. And I sort of wondered, why? Because some A levels like further maths take so much time. Others like business and economics are much faster and shorter. So I sort of assumed I could get through more of these things. And then I also assumed that doing more would help me get into the schools. So I began to kind of, construct this team around me to kind of crank out the results.
That's so cool. Have you heard of Alpha School?
I have. I've been reading all about it. I'm actually going to an Alpha School demo in New York shortly. And we just bought a school in New Zealand called the Academy for Gifted Education. And we're adding a lot of AI learning during the days with some references back to Alpha School.
Maybe you want to explain quickly what Alpha School is and that concept. And then.
So the idea behind Alpha School is that in a traditional school day, you might spend 7 hours in classes, but it's pretty inefficient. You've got these large group classes, the teacher's teaching to this big group of students, often who may be distracted. They might be looking at their laptops. There might be different levels of ability. Alpha School promises to get through all that content in 2 hours rather than 7 through a hyper-efficient one-on-one delivery where you're interacting with an AI. And rather than teachers, you have a motivational coach of sorts who essentially is like that self-discipline thing that I described earlier. Then once you get through your 2 hours of high-intensity work, you then can do other things. Like you can go and do some debating, or you can do some community service, which in the world of college admissions is like your extracurricular building. So essentially, it's almost like removing the time loss you get from physical schools. And that's really the model. Now, the critique of the model is that if you're a very high achieving student, this kind of self-paced learning can work quite well. Maybe myself in high school, I liked academics, and so I kind of had the willpower to do this. But a lot of the time, if you're struggling in school, this kind of high intensity one-on-one model can be challenging because it can be not so rewarding compared to like a fun social dynamic in a classroom. So anyway, Alpha School promises to revolutionize schooling, and it's sort of charging quite premium prices beginning in parts of the US, and they're kind of seeing how fast they can scale this thing.
Well, I mean, on the incentive model, they have this whole like they actually pay students, which is the incentive piece.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I read some research on sort of the effects of paying students to get grades, and from what I can see, from what I've read, it's not ultimately that effective. I mean, what I've seen at Crimson is the kids that really crank, ultimately, the reward is not money. The reward is an understanding of how this grade fits into some long-term game plan. And maybe the game plan changes, but ultimately, once you start seeing the grades as your progress to your ambitious vision for yourself in the future, then you really care. And so often students that really grind in high school, like myself, have this combination of intrinsic curiosity for the subject and then an extrinsic kind of goal orientation. And I think anyone who says, oh, you're just going to study hard because you like the subject is kind of dreaming, because, you also could just listen to random podcasts too to learn about, economics. So you need an element of tactical thinking to kind of really want to grind the academics. But yeah, I think that intrinsic extrinsic combo is very important.
Let's go back to the kind of Crimson story. So you were saying you were at the Ice House, you saw all these startups kind of asking for money even though they didn't have any revenue. You were bringing in 300K in your first year. What was your kind of conclusion from there?
Well, my conclusion was, we should raise some money and, we should go faster. And I figured if I can, really take this thing to more countries, it could be really good. Now, I had this great mentor, the late Julian Robertson, and, it's fair to say he had a really transformative effect on my life on so many areas. But one of the things he did is he introduced me to these guys who had invested in New Oriental and Teleeducation Group in China. These two companies that had begun as after-school tutoring centers and had evolved into these $40 and $30 billion respectively massive education companies that were responsible for educating huge numbers of ambitious Chinese kids, both to stay within China and to go global. So I saw this and I figured, I should do Crimson in more countries. And if I'm getting all this traction in New Zealand, which is a relatively chill academic country, surely if I do this in like Singapore or Vietnam or Brazil or something, I could do it at a much bigger scale. So I raised my seed round when I was 19 in college from the late Julian Robertson and Chase Coleman, a bunch of these Kiwi guys. I flew back to New Zealand for 24 hours to close around at this Ice Angel showcase event, raised the money, and then we went hard, grown, and then we raised our Series A round when I was 20, and then our Series B round when I was 21. And
sorry, you're still at Harvard as you're doing this?
Yes. So I raised these three first funding rounds while I was still a student, and so by the end of it, I'd closed the Series B round. I was also graduating from college. We raised like a $30 million round. These days it's sort of like a cute A round, but back in 2016, that was a pretty chunky raise for an early stage company.
Is it New Zealand or US?
US. And the game plan behind this raise was to go from New Zealand and Australia to 20 plus key markets we identified. So when I finished Harvard that next year, I was basically on a plane every week, opening up Crimson markets in Thailand and Russia and Vietnam and Singapore. And it was full, balls to the wall to really get this thing moving. And the idea was I wanted to be first in many of these markets to kind of build out this college admissions offering, get the networks going. And at the same time, Uber was rapidly growing around the world. And I was very inspired by their city launch model. So we created a growth operations team led by this guy called Kevin Park, who's still with us today, grinding on a new business we're very excited about. And we began kind of going very global. So that was how we began to ramp Crimson from a kind of ANZ company to a very global college admissions business.
And while you were still in Harvard, did you ever think about dropping out? Because lots of your kind of founder peers who start something in college, they just kind of drop college at some point and you're like, it's not worth my time.
Yeah, totally. So I had these guys actually in my year and it was quite funny. I think they saw Crimson and they like sort of tried to copy it and they dropped out. They raised maybe 50 million in total, but certainly in the colleges they raised a couple of million. And they basically were trying to do college admissions in North America, similar to my model, but that I was doing around the world. And they took the dropout approach. For me, I really value education. I just also thought, like on a very first principles level, I'm in the education business and it feels sort of BS to not finish my education. Now, I couldn't see the time that I was going to do a lot more education, but certainly I thought I'd finish my Harvard degree. And so I thought, there's no chance I'm dropping out. I didn't come all this way, spending all these years to, not finish this great experience. And I was already building Crimson quite successfully while I was a student, so I didn't really feel the need to drop out. And it felt quite additive to what I was doing, to be finishing my degree. So I never really thought about dropping out, although I had some folks mention it. But actually, honestly, to the credit of my amazing investors, they never asked me or even thought that I would drop out. They just assumed that I could do both, which I really appreciated. So that was really the idea. But yeah, it's actually early on is funny. It's developed so much the world, but there was the Teal Fellowship, and back then it was quite early stage. And I just heard about these guys doing random biology things that were Teal Fellows, and so I did speak to the Teal Fellowship, but I never really liked the idea of taking a year off or anything. So yeah, I would say I was never very open minded to dropping out. I was always very committed to finishing. What I did do is speed things up. So I took 6 classes every semester to get through my degree faster. And so my approach was, rather than dropping out, just finish it quicker, so that I could go and build Crimson.
And most of your tutors were at Harvard, right? Like most of your actual people you were hiring, like that was your unique advantage, right? So actually dropping out would have hurt that, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And now the guys that did drop out, they basically opened an office in Harvard, and they would similarly tap into the Harvard community. Exactly. I just thought, this is kind of crazy, because I'm going to be a Harvard alum in the future. I can keep hiring these Harvard, Harvard kids and Harvard grads, and they can become great mentors for Crimson. Why would I ever drop out? And then I just had these experiences, I got hired by Tiger Management, and they never would have interviewed me had I not been a Harvard student. And I thought it would be crazy to have this sort of, I feel like I hit the jackpot getting into these schools. It would be crazy to sort of throw that advantage to the wind. Who knows what can happen. So yeah, I was very committed to finishing my degree.
Wait, sorry, you got hired by Tiger?
Yes, so I worked for Tiger Management when I was in college, from age 19 to 21, and I would go down to New York on Thursdays and Fridays, and I'd work throughout the week doing stock investing. So it was quite hectic, because they basically invested in Crimson and hired me to work for them. And so I was learning investing, managing these stock portfolios, like pitching ideas, which was pretty adrenaline pumping, honestly. And then I was, building Crimson rapidly with my team. So it was really fun and exhilarating.
So Jesus Christ. So you were working for Tiger, building Crimson, and taking more classes than you should have.
Yes.
Every semester.
And I just loved it. It was pretty nuts. Like, I remember I'd have an assignment due at 8 a.m. or something, and I'd open the assignment, it'd be 4 p.m. and I would have no idea these concepts, because I'd missed the lecture that week or something. And I'd have this mad hustle to get through my Crimson calls and then figure out this mysterious concept and then submit my problem set on time, often at 4 a.m. or something in the science center. And I'd hobble to the thing, back then it was paper. So I'd drop the paper into the little bucket, and then I'd go back to my room and sleep before the classes began. But I just loved it, and it was sort of why I came to America, right, for this high intensity, action packed adventure. So I just kept jamming more and more and more things into the schedule. But I loved it, and I was just learning so much. I was learning so much about investing. I was meeting awesome people in New York. Crimson was really cracking. It was super fun, amazing classmates. So it was an incredible time.
Well, like I was saying earlier, I've been the underachiever of the century.
Yeah, that's incredible. So when you graduated from Harvard, did you then want to go all in on Crimson? And what was your kind of big vision once you started kind of really focusing on it?
Yeah, so my initial goal coming to America, as we talked about earlier, was to get onto Wall Street. And, my idea was I was going to work for Tiger, then I was going to launch a hedge fund and, scale this thing. When I was at Tiger, there are a couple of interesting things. The first is that I began seeing this trend where there was these hedge fund hotel stocks where many, many hedge funds were involved in the same, longs, the same shorts. And there were these theses that would be spread around the city. And I'd look around Tiger, and there was Rhodes Scholars and Harvard Business School guys. And, all these dudes were sort of super competitive academic types. And it felt to me there was some alpha here, but it was certainly a very competitive arena. Meanwhile, I was thinking about college admissions, and I was having a great time coaching these students, but also from a business standpoint, it felt like there was this global opportunity that was untapped. And actually, there should be way more guidance taking place than there exists. And this problem exists all around the world. And I was in a good position to build it. And I thought, I have a unique competitive edge because I was a foreign kid who came to Harvard through this process. I'm entrepreneurial, and I have some knowledge of business. So I thought I could do this. So my game plan initially was to graduate from Harvard, launch my hedge fund, rock and roll. But I guess as I was raising the third round, the Series B round, I thought, actually, this is really what I should be doing. I love it. It's really fulfilling. I love working with the students, and it's also very scalable. And, I was pretty high conviction that it would be a lot of execution, but if I pull the trigger on Crimson, I could build a really scaled company. And so,
Wait, hold on.
Yeah, go.
But you were raising money, and at the same time, you were thinking, I'm going to go for a while, thinking I'm still going to go and start a hedge fund.
Yeah. So for my seed round and my Series A round, I had my various co-founders, and remember, keep in mind, the people that I was going to launched the hedge fund with were the people that were my investors in Crimson. So it was all the same family. So basically these guys just were cheering me on in any of these domains. And so it wasn't like two different sets of people. It was the same core. And, I'd be talking to my mentor, Julian, about these different tracks. Should I do this investing route? Should I go hardcore on Crimson? And keep in mind that for me, these seed and A rounds were like, gigantic. But for them, they're like, as they call them, science experiments to see if this thing would crank. And so when it started to get real, like Series B was when it was really like, what am I doing? And I had to be decisive then, because that was when I went from raising sort of money from these guys individually to actually the institutional fund with their own outside investors. And at that point, I had to really commit. Was I going to go full time on Crimson and just ship this thing and build it with everything I've got, or do my finance stuff? And, I thought about it, but it just felt very natural to do Crimson. So it was actually a very easy choice. And it was funny, actually, because many of my classmates at Harvard, they were really obsessed with getting these, tiger jobs, these hedge fund jobs. And so I think it was kind of ostensibly wacky to leave that and do college admissions. But, I was pumped to do it. So I think by the time I was probably 20 and a half, I was very convinced that I was going to ship it on Crimson. And I was having a blast with my team and, went all in.
Wow. So what did you like figure out? Like, is this whole, because to me, this whole college admissions thing feels like a very strange and arbitrary process, right? Like, I went to Princeton and like, I think it was complete like luck of the draw. Like, I met people there who thought were great. Some people were like, I was like, I'm not sure why you got in. I don't know if you had that experience with Harvard. And it felt like quite an arbitrary process where like you could sort of game some things, but at the end of the day, it was like still quite a luck-based kind of thing. I'm curious what you thought about that. Like, how did you think about this whole like thing? Was this actually a real problem you were solving? Like, I understand there's anxious parents, tiger parents who want to like invest money and feel like they're doing something for their kid. And probably tutoring and like giving advice is probably useful in and of itself, but like tying it to like college admissions, then kind of, I think in my mind, my kind of makes it feel like it's a step too far because you don't control that. There's arbitrary kind of decision making that happens there. Did you feel like there was a real process and real kind of like, I don't know, you really increasing the chances, or like, yeah, how do you think about kind of what you're actually kind of selling as a product?
Yeah, so we were very much selling this end-to-end process where we would start with you very early, we'd train you over several years, and we would generate enough alpha such that if you apply to the range of schools we're targeting, we'll get you into one of these schools. So we really were selling this end-to-end offering. So we weren't selling a particular school you were going to get into because you can't predict that perfectly, but we were selling perhaps a basket of schools that we thought you had a good shot of getting into, and we were pretty good at calibrating what you can get into. We would build these packages that were very high intensity around getting to the necessarily score thresholds to make it, de-risked. And I think a lot of the people that, you meet at Princeton that have kind of quote unquote random backgrounds, as you said, it can be legacies. It could be some athlete who doesn't have traditional academics or some other thing. But if you think about the foreign kids that get in, there's not really many crazy cases. They're usually all very academic. And I think that in general, it's quite a repeatable, consistent process, not to get into one specific school like Princeton, but to get into like a basket of schools conditional on a tier of applicant. And, just like in stock investing, you don't have a perfect outcome when you buy a stock, but you build this portfolio of stocks with different risk return profiles, just like you've got like a mixture of schools with different correlations and characteristics, and you've got candidates with some ambiguity. Remember I was building Crimson while I was stock investing, so I felt like a very relevant analogy. So yeah, I mean, basically we were selling this end to end, and I think people like college counseling because it is end to end, because you wouldn't use all this tutoring if there wasn't this process and this incentive system at the end of it. There were rewards that I would say.
I see. So yeah, and you were focused on non-US markets. That was kind of the core thing, right?
Yeah. Also, at this point, it was all foreign kids coming to America. We didn't have any US clients. We took the occasional guy in Boston just through like a Harvard classmate who would refer me somebody, but it felt like a alien language. And I just had no intuition for what it's like to be an American applying to US colleges, because all my intuition was like these foreign kids coming over. And the other thing is, Americans at this point, it was a very different level of competition to get in. So like I'd meet these kids from China with 10 APs, and I'd meet some American kid with 3 APs who'd gotten into like Harvard or something. And I would just, it was a very different intuition. And that was because, that's still true now, but back then in particular, there was a huge gap between the average international kid and the average domestic American kid as far as how hard it is to go. And, the kind of competitions they did and stuff were quite different. So my initial call was, I'm not going to worry about Americans. I don't understand this. I'm going to focus on the foreign kids, and the segments like me. And then I'm going to go from there.
So what's the formula?
The song by the guy from Linkin Park, it's like 15%.
Yeah.
I can't remember the lyrics.
50% pressure, 20%.
Yeah. So I think the formula, this is a bit simplified, but for the top schools, it's about 40% academics, 30% extracurriculars and leadership, 30% essays and interviews. The 40% academics, if your academics suck, you're screwed anyway. So when I say 40% academics, it means subject to being academic enough to be like competitive. That's kind of how the mix sort of plays out. And within the academic category, there's SAT, ACT, there's your internal grades, things you use to show intellectual vitality outside of school. The next category is your 10 activities plus leadership projects you do. And the final one is just all the different essays you write, plus the interview you have with an alumni, which has varying significance. And so, you basically have the scoreboard across these different traits. Initially, there's an academic cutoff. Once you pass the academic cutoff, you're then kind of in the arena. And then you've got to appeal to kind of people who have to really fall in love with your story and then want to admit you within your regional quota. So there isn't like a secret science formula here, but there is, a variety of competitions, activities, initiatives that you can do that will make you very favorable compared to people from your country and who you're competing with. And if you have a strong enough profile and you apply to a broad enough range of schools, you'll get in at a very high hit rate. So our Crimson kids get in at about 7 times the success rate of applying by themselves over a huge data set over 12 years. So at this point, we do have quite a good recipe.
And where's the ease? Are there, I assume this is true. I assume different regions have different eases of different competitive levels, right? Like if you're from Alaska or something, probably or North Dakota, in the US, but I guess, do you see that globally as well? Where's the easiest place to apply from?
Yeah, so certainly in the US, the easiest places are places like Montana, and then the hardest places are New York and California. And if you just think about sort of sophistication of competition, intensity of schools, intensity of parenting, also the amount of let's say, in some of these states, people just think of their state as the whole world, right? Their local university is the best option. And for a long time, that was actually happening all across America. It's only quite a recent phenomenon that everyone applies across the whole nation. A lot of the time, if you talk to the parents in America right now, many of them went to their in-state college because that was the thing that you do. Not so much if you meet New York parents, but if you meet random people in Michigan, a lot of them have Michigan degrees because that's just what they did. So I think there was that phenomena. But yeah, so long story short, Montana and stuff would be the easiest based on those characteristics. When it comes to international countries, the most crazy is India, Korea, China. And then the easiest would be places like South Africa. Or if you're applying from a disadvantaged background, for example, from an indigenous community. It's interesting because theoretically there shouldn't be discrimination anymore based on race. But what we see is that people applying from these indigenous backgrounds from outside of America get in at much higher rates. So I think, probably some cultural disadvantage there, or a place like South Africa is a great place to apply from.
Why South Africa? I would have thought that I don't know, a Zimbabwe or I don't know, or Congo, or do you not even have people in those places as clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably, okay, fine. Sierra Leone might be the easiest place to apply from, but I'm sort of adjusting for where people are actually applying from. There aren't many applicants in those places. So yeah, but I mean, theoretically, yeah, you could move to Sierra Leone and apply from there if you really wanted to. But you'd
have to survive. You have to survive long enough to.
yeah, that's true.
Interesting.
So you graduated in 2016, right? Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, I was in the class in 2017, but I finished in 2016.
Right. And then so you went all in on kind of this global vision of Crimson and went kind of more or less full time on becoming the CEO, or being the CEO and scaling it across the globe.
That's right. It was very much full send. And, that was a crazy year. We were in different cities every couple of weeks, building new markets, hiring country managers. And we were kind of really figuring out how to grow our sales and marketing engine, how to localize the product, how to scale the service, how to build our app. It was a lot of burning fires at the same time.
But did you have an indication that every place that there was demand? Okay, so you did New Zealand, it kind of worked. Then maybe you did Australia, it's similar. Okay, it kind of worked. But did you have? It was just intuition, other places should have this or will want this, or how do you think about that, and how do you think about sequencing which countries to go after, and
Yeah, so we did almost like a management consulting style analysis of all these markets. We looked at factors like how many people were applying, how many international schools there were, what curriculums there were, what we thought about affordability within the country, and we ranked all of the key markets. And so there was quite a top-down view. But, we opened in Thailand third. Why? Because I was on a boat at this entrepreneurship competition, and there was a girl next to me that I was talking to. I thought she was 22. Turns out she was 36, and she was also a Harvard applied math grad, but I guess Thai people don't age. So I hired her to become our country manager, and she became our Thailand country launcher called POM. And she was a rock star. She was a king. She was the King's medalist or something in Thailand. She was #1 in the country academically, went to Harvard, and she had these young kids, and she was doing private equity, but she wanted more time, and she loved education. So she jumped in, bought first country manager. So we had like the markets we wanted to hit, but then it was a bit of a, symphony of serendipity around who we found when and where to ship them into various markets. For example, to describe how random this is, I visited my buddy Andy Chen in Yale NUS, which is a school in Singapore that's now closed. I was in the cafeteria and he was saying, hey, by the way, Jamie, see that kid over there? He's the entrepreneurship guy at Yale NUS. And I look over and it was this dude called Andrew Wooten. And I spoke to him and he was half Russian and he was half American. I said, you're half Russian. Do you want to open Crimson in Russia? And, he took a gap year and he just opened Crimson Russia. He was 19. And then he went on to become our chief revenue officer. And he, grew like a several hundred person sales and marketing team. And, Russia became one of our biggest markets in Crimson for some of those early years. And then he built like our whole like revenue team. So it was there was a combination of like good top-down analysis plus serendipity and just being entrepreneurial. But it was also kind of scary because we were cranking up our cash burn, taking a lot of bets on different markets with this belief that we'd be able to make it work. I think if you kind of roll the dice in this scenario, I don't know, 6 times, you probably only make it out alive 3 times. So I'm glad we got lucky on that one.
And
Are you still in Russia?
Yeah, we're still in Russia, although a lot of our staff in Russia have moved out to like other parts of the CIS region, and we serve a lot of Russian clients remotely, so it's gotten a bit harder to service. We're also in Kazakhstan too, but actually our Russian market, how we define it, has kept growing because we keep servicing like global Russians.
Can you give us a sense of the scale that you got to? So in 2016, when you left college, it was at like 5 million revenue, you said. How did that kind of go from there in terms of numbers, students?
I can say now, last year we did just over 300 million in sales, New Zealand dollars. We've basically been able to grow revenue, typically like, 50 to 100% year-over-year growth numbers. I think we went from 5 to 15 million. And then I think we went to like in a mid 20s, then like 37, then maybe in the mid 50s, something like this. We've been able to keep posting pretty good growth, largely organically. We've launched some new business units. Like we've got an online high school. We have a lot of other units now. We've got a unit that helps people getting visas who want to go to the US, like O1 visas. We've got like physical schools and all kinds of stuff. But I think a lot of this growth came from, the global rollout of college missions. And actually that mysterious American market that I had no idea about at the beginning has become our biggest market at Crimson, one of our fastest growing markets. So it's really interesting, actually. Our strategy was we're going to compete first where there was no competitors, and we're going to build a position, and then we're going to figure out how this works. We're going to build our app, build our curriculum, and then we're going to enter more savvy markets like China and India, Korea, then finally America. And I guess in hindsight, that was maybe a good strategy. Arguably, we should have started earlier in America, but I guess it's working out so well.
And Jamie, whenever you expand into other markets, what does that mean? Like whenever you send this Thai girl or this Russian guy, like to go there, and like what do they actually do?
So they, we register, we hire, we open an office, we hire sales and marketers on the ground, we create local school partnerships, we hire local service delivery staff, we find local clients. In the world of college missions, you can't really if you're chilling in California, you're not really going to be able to get many clients from Russia to join you. You need to kind of have that on the ground presence usually to build that trust, particularly initially. So when I say open a market, I mean hire a country manager, hire a local team. In the same
but then like, what is the team doing? Is the team like literally going out and finding customers, or are they working with the kids, or like what are they?
Both. They're finding customers, and then they're not doing all of the service because a lot of the service is globally standardized, but they're doing the localization. So, for example, you've got a Russian mum, she can't speak English, but the Russian team will translate to her, will bring her up to speed. And then the kind of English-speaking main team will just work with the kid. So there will be some localized language support, and then there'll be like business development on the ground, sales and marketing and stuff to find the students and grow Crimson's recognition in that market.
So but the core kind of service delivery would still happen over Zoom or video calls in English.
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you ever have a problem where like the kids don't speak English that well?
Well, most of the kids applying, right, they want to go to top US schools, so they have to be able to speak English to a high level because they've got to often sit the SAT or the TOEFL. And if their English isn't good, they're kind of screwed in the process. So I would say they almost all speak pretty good English. We have some products for second language English speakers, but it's quite rare that, we get anyone in our college admissions business that isn't quite strong in English. They might have a strong accent or something, but often their grammar is very good because they've got to achieve high scores in the SAT. So I'd say it's quite a self-filtering product, which actually means it's nice because as we built out the core college admissions service, even though it was like 20 plus countries, there was a lot of similarity in how we delivered it because ultimately we were gating all of this foreign talent towards the same end goal, which was US colleges.
So what's next for Crimson from here? You're 300 million revenue. You're all over the world. Also, you launched a school. We spoke to Penny on the podcast a few months ago. How do you see the future of Crimson evolving?
Well, that's a big question, but I'll focus on one thing I'm very excited about, which is very relevant to New Zealand. After a couple of years of hard work, we recently secured this national online charter school license, which means we can service kids anywhere in the country, and we work with the government, the Department of Education, so the student isn't paying any money out of pocket. They can access this amazing Crimson quality high school experience. It's really exciting because if you're a kid in rural New Zealand, you've got this physical school, which isn't going to be very good usually. It's hard to find good teachers there. And certainly if you have big ambitions on the world stage, it's very hard to unlock that. So a lot of the kids that have been getting abroad to the US typically have come from Auckland historically. So through our online high school, we're able to now service a much wider range of students across the Kiwi diaspora, many of which aren't going to be aiming for foreign universities, but maybe getting them into, University of Auckland is considered a major win for them. So that is really exciting because it's very scalable and it enables us to take many of the learnings of the last 12 years and also some of my research from Oxford around online schooling achievement to Kiwis in a much more scalable, systematic way. So that's really exciting. And part of our vision at Crimson is building this next generation education system. So college admissions being very much like the start of this journey, and then schooling is broader. But this, schooling in partnership with the government is very scalable. And my general belief is the government struggles to deliver schooling, at a world-class level at scale because, it's tough for these, bureaucratic organizations to really function well in these, remote parts of the country. And so actually having partners like Crimson who are very dialed in at online delivery, we can recruit elite teachers, we can run these things, we love academics. It's a very powerful partnership for, both the taxpayer and also the student and the teacher. So, we're going to work hard on this and knock it out of the park. But that's a very exciting next evolution. And, it's a material opportunity from a business standpoint, but actually as a Kiwi from really an impact standpoint.
So is that something that kids will be able to choose to go to, or will be mandated, or how will it work?
Yeah, so actually just yesterday was the day that the lottery went live. So we basically have an enrollment level we're allowed to take. Kids will fill out the online submission and we have to take them in order of the time which they applied. So we had like the full roll filled within 4 hours yesterday because kids all across the country submitted. And so, we're accumulating this large wait list. But basically that the child applies, you got to take them in that order because it's a government funded school. So we can't choose who we admit. And then, we've got to really do right by them and deliver some great academic outcomes in partnership with them and their parents.
Why do you have a limit if it's online?
We can scale it more, but there's a funding limit based on how many students the government allocates to us each year. So we can apply for more, but the government has like a budget of how much they're willing to spend on charter schooling and funding per student. And so they tell the charter schools, hey, you guys have this target to hit. Now, from our understanding, we have the biggest one that's been given, which is exciting and is a good demonstration of the confidence the department has in Crimson, which I think is well placed because we do have a very good team for this. And some of the guys helping me ran the biggest charter schools in America. One is the head of the Stanford Online High School. We have like a really crack team here to deliver this, which is exciting. And I think for a new policy like charter schooling, you don't want to have random operators. You want to do this at great scale with great results because it's high stakes. Like if the first guys screw it up, it kind of ruins it for everyone else. And if we can deliver a really robust national experiment and get great outcomes, then, it can become a mainstream part of public policy going forward. So, we're putting everything we've got at this, and it's a big passion of mine right now.
How does it work? So is it basically it's just you're on your computer, you're sitting there, and you have just lectures, and then there's other people in the same lectures, you ask questions. How does that actually work?
Yeah, so like you described, you're sitting in a live class, video cameras on, a lot of interactive tools, in classroom debates, conversations. There's nowhere to hide because the teacher's cold calling on you like a Harvard Business School class, and you've got to turn up for class. And then, it's a classic high school academic lecture, but quite focused on exam results, quite focused on academic success, quite focused on university entry. And so that's really the delivery model. And it's based on learnings from our Crimson Global Academy, which is our existing online high school that has nearly 3,000 students. And, through that, we've got great reps with delivering online learning at a high quality. And so we're going to do that now for a wider range of Kiwi students.
How did you go from like advising on sort of like hacking this college admission system to full on education? What was the thinking behind that? Like from like a strategic point of view, also from a business point of view? Also from like a talent and capability point of view, it's different capabilities, different talent, right?
So you use the word hacking, and I can see, Mark, as you think about this college admissions process with great skepticism, which I appreciate. You kind of think about this like we sort of go out there with our Grand Theft Auto cheat codes, hit a bunch of buttons, and the kid gets in. But actually, in reality, we often begin with kids like 14, and we're going to spend a lot of time building their raw human capital, increasing their academic skills in math, making them better students, making them better communicators. So they actually build very high intensity skills through this process. And so I would say what we do is probably 90% like skill creation, and then probably 10% like marketing optimization. But a lot of the value is actually training the child. So when it came to going from college admissions to the online high school, we already had a lot of experience with actually developing students' ability. And we were already delivering a lot of classes one-on-one. And so the main change was going from one-on-one to groups, and then also going from like tutors to teachers, which are a very different kettle of fish to organize, manage, hire, and recruit. So once we did that evolution, we were then building those capabilities that are now helping us doing this charter school. But yeah, I would say the desire to go from college admissions to schooling is that in college admissions, you have a couple hours a week with the student. But in schooling, it's you control the whole end-to-end result. So if you're good at what you do, you can deliver great outcomes, which is exciting. And we had these amazing cases of students that basically would use us for like 6 A levels. And this boy Samil, he went from Hamilton, he got into 5 Ivy League schools, got into Stanford, he completed 6 A levels, he was the second best NCS student in the country, and he had about 20 Crimson tutors helping him. And when I saw cases like this, where the more Crimson the kid had, the better the results, I began to build conviction that we could, successfully build an online high school. And we had great advisors, as I mentioned. Behind that, I did my PhD on that at Oxford. And we sort of had the theoretical foundations, and we thought we could extend our competencies to that. That's been a really fun adventure.
Interesting, but like, what has sort of stopped? I mean, I guess like, tell me more about education in general, right? Because like, education as a whole, I mean, that's the whole Apple school like theory and approach, which I agree with generally. Is just like you waste kind of 12 years of your life, right? And like they've sort of proven that you can get 7 years back if you do like Alpha school end to end. You can do like the whole like K-12 curriculum and whatever, like in 5 years, you get 7 years back, right? Like, how do you guys, so, and like, I guess the other kind of piece of research has been shown is like, if you, like the whole like 2 Sigma thing, right? If you sit people down, you one-on-one tutoring, you move them like 2 Sigmas or whatever, right? Like, how does that all kind of factor into what you're trying to do? Because I think when you start working with governments and like you become a school, like it's different objectives. Like as a parent, as an individual, you're very incentivized, like I want to do the best thing for this person. Whereas like as a school, you have this like broader good that you have to like look after. And like the incentives get muddled. And so I feel like that's why schools have always been kind of I think in today's world where like it's really unclear, like you don't need to actually force everyone to like learn these specific skills at this exact time. And it's more like focused on creativity. Like you get confusion. Teachers don't know why they're there. Kids don't know why they're learning this stuff. It's not like this stuff. And government kind of doesn't know, right? Government doesn't know what the bigger vision should be. Like, should we make everyone like geniuses, or should we just make sure everyone's kind of like competent, or should we just actually encourage kids to explore their passions? And if that's being a TikToker, that's fine too, right? Like you start getting kind of confusion about like what is the purpose of education when governments get involved. How do you think about that?
So I think the first thing is when you go through high intensity education, it generally instills within you a level of focus, self-determination, resilience, stamina, coordination, time management, a lot of these executive functioning skills, which are really important. If you think about kids that drop out of high school, the problem with like leaving high school early and leaving schooling early in general is you don't just lose content, you actually lose a lot of capability you need as an adult to like function effectively and commit to things and solve them end to end. And to some degree, the schooling system is almost like this human conditioning to make you able to function in the economy and be reliable and these kind of things. So more than any kind of content, I think a large part of schooling is that. And generally, when I meet many kids that are very talented and they want to drop out. And in general, the people that drop out, the people that don't finish school, normally have some sort of dysfunction in some area of their executive functioning. They might be very talented in some dimension, very creative, but maybe they're not as able to stick with things or as resilient. So I think that the Alpha School 5 hours, 12 years thing, 5 years, 12 years thing, I think the problem with this is, Kumon's very similar. Okay, so you can do Kumon and you can get through 12 years of school in 5 years too. And so it's actually very similar to that. But at the same time, no one just does Kumon then finishes school, because you typically build a lot of other social skills, you build a lot of, relationship building skills. And if you leave school too early, you kind of have this very isolated experience and you probably don't function that well in your career. And a lot of the young child prodigies, really don't, they struggle in the real economy for some of those reasons. So I normally don't recommend kids to go to university too early. So to answer your question overall, what is the point of the schooling system? What should the government worry about? I do think, great academic outcomes, high university entrance rates are very important. I think a lot of those soft skills that I mentioned earlier are very important as well. Socialization is really important. And ideally some interest discovery too, some inclination of what you want to do in the future. But I think if I could choose between a system where kids can do whatever they want, drop out, do whatever, be TikTokers, or a highly structured Singapore-like education engine, which has a very high completion rate and a very high rate of university degree completion, I would still choose the second thing. I don't particularly have any attachment to universities. Like, I'd be happy if the first thing worked, I would be fine with that. But what I've seen is that the kids that tend to drop out early usually really struggle. And a lot of the kids that I meet, even Teal fellows who drop out of university when they're like 19, much of it, they have a lot of mad regret and darkness about it because they feel like they've missed some social part of their life. Even the ones who are wildly successful. I'm not sure about Dylan from Figma, but I know a lot of Teal fellows that have sort of an angst about this. So long story short, I think actually when university start to deviate from the incentives that an individual has, that's when problems start arising. Like, you shouldn't be trying to be too woo-woo and creative about this. I think the best schooling is very black and white. Great academics, focused, high standards, high intensity. It's a little bit stressful, but it makes you grow as a person, and you build fraternity through it, and you can be a functioning adult. So that's probably my hot take.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, right? But what you're saying basically is like you should learn some basic skills, and you should also learn the soft skills, and obviously you should be like growing up around peers because that teaches you some other like social skills. But like, I guess my question is like, is the substrate the like K through 12 curriculum, which again, you can actually do, most people can do in like much shorter time. Just is that like actually a good use of people's time? Is that the right substrate on which to be learning these skills?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so I think everyone should get through that K-12 curriculum, and if they get through it faster, that's all good. What they should then do is find some interesting niches. It could be AI, it could be neuroscience, psychology, whatever. It could be public health, could be urban town planning, and they can just go deep in that area. So I'm totally fine with like accelerated learning. But what I think is problematic is dropping out of school too early, or having sort of this unstructured teenage years where you're going through a lot of growth, but you're not in that environment. So I think I am totally fine with making sure that human potential is accelerated because of AI and other capabilities, such that tomorrow's 18-year-old is smarter than yesterday's because they've gotten through more content. I'm fine with that. But I think you don't want to mess with the social conditioning of the system too much. And normally I just see too many examples of kids where dropping out early creates, all kinds of weird problems.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
Also,
do you think that,
I was going to say, like, school is one of the most social things anyone ever experiences. Think about this. When you're in high school, you're around like maybe you date some girls, some people, reject you, others like you. But, where are you in an environment where you've got all these people, romantically, then all these friends and then all these teachers, and it's such a dynamic social situation all the time, right? You've got all these people competing for the same things. You have sports teams in there. People know about your highs, your lows, your family background, whatever. It's a very intense social situation. As you become like an adult, and you're in your nuclear house, the concentration of human interaction typically drops off dramatically. And so I think it's very important actually at the start of your life to have the super high density social experience, because it kind of primes you well for later years. So some people hate school, but I think that there is a lot of value to that. Now, some kids these days have like intense social anxieties from the physical school. And, to some degree, there's a lot of online schooling because physical school is quite intense socially. But I think on the whole, it's very powerful.
No, but the thing is, like, I think, like, because what you just said, I mean, school is not representative of the real world, right? It's like in the real world, like you have some objective, like, I don't know, you go to work, or you because you like the thing you do, or you need money or whatever, and like you interact with people who you like. In school, like none of that applies. It's like this artificial environment that's not representative of anything else that you're going to do. So like, why is that actually useful for kids to experience? Like, why is it useful to like do things you don't want to do, interact with people you don't want to interact with? I mean, maybe you do like to, but like you kind of force into this, like, right? What actually, we live in a world now where like you can really do whatever you want. You can work on anything you want. Usually it's with a computer. You can live wherever you want. Create a life that is like much more customized than like at any time in human history. So like, what is the point of actually like going through this like sort of, like kind of painful for some kids process if it's not representative?
I mean, I think that first of all, when it comes to socializing, the same way there's like 10,000 hours of I don't know, math to become an expert or something. 10,000 hours of painful socializing where you're experiencing, that bully in school, or you're experiencing that person who's rejected you, or you're experiencing, that friend who's stolen your PSP or whatever. Those interactions, make you ready for the real world. And I think if you had a very diluted version of that, where you just interacted with a fraction of those people in those first 18 years, you'd have far less reps about how society and humanity functions to go. So, it doesn't need to be exactly, 18 years. Like, I'm not sure. But on the whole, I think this like high immersion socialization thing is probably net good. And in general, people that don't have that socialization often have unusual problems that emerge later on. And, all those conflicts you experience basically make you, a more functioning adult. I think I'm all for a pick your own adventure, modern economy thing. If you want to be a remote worker in Bali, like, be my guest. And I think early on in your life, there's an element of, training, which is good. And I think the same way, I don't know, puppies go through the same socializing process, or animals do. There's an element of, we are all humans and there are some commonalities. And this is somewhat of a, like, I don't know how many hours you need to socialize to be socialized, but whatever that threshold is, it seems like school is quite an effective high dosage way to get there.
Interesting. But doesn't it, and then the next point is like, doesn't the online school kind of completely mess with that and prevent you from having the full like high intensity degree of exposure?
So I guess our online school is one in which every class you sit in is live, and you discuss live, like this conversation. Like, you and I met for, I don't know, 30 minutes in that place. We're having this great discussion. We're exchanging and learning from one another here. Is this the same as you and I talking in person? It's probably not exactly the same, but it's probably better than us both looking at our TikTok feeds. So I think in our school, we acknowledge that being online maybe isn't as compelling as a physical environment. But for a rural kid in some part of New Zealand where the physical school kind of sucks or isn't as compelling, this is a much better option than that. And so we do think that the socializing effect can still take place online in a live context. What I don't like is like cameras off, text-based chat. I think that's not really getting to the point. But I think a conversation like this is totally fine. And actually is kind of like remote work. I don't know about you guys, but certainly at Crimson, I spend more time on remote calls than I do in-person meetings, by far. And so a conversation like this is actually quite representative of modern work.
Yep, that makes sense. One quick question on the business side of Crimson. I mean, the customers eventually churn out, right? They eventually like go through school, or they don't need tutoring anymore. And you've managed to keep growing through that. How do you think about that? I mean, is that a problem? I guess why you sort of gone into school, because you can get more of their lifetime and value, probably more value kind of throughout their lifetime as customers. But yeah, do you kind of see that being a problem? Will that at some point sort of like plateau, or the growth plateau? Are you thinking about, I guess you are, new business models and new products?
So I guess, everyone loves enterprise SaaS because you sort of have this wonderful recurring revenue, but ultimately most of the world's revenue and business is not in enterprise SaaS. And there are companies that sell you a fridge that you might use once and maybe you change brands. So I guess there are many great businesses that aren't like perfectly recurring. In our case, actually, for something in education, we normally will spend, 4 to 6 years with a student. So it's actually a very long-term relationship with them. And, we're able to add a lot of value to them and capture some of that value in our delivery. So the economics actually work quite well. Certainly, we love schooling too. We don't necessarily do schooling because it's like some desire to change our model. In fact, today, our college admissions business is one of our strongest around the world, and certainly has been a sustained driver of growth for us. So yeah, I mean, ultimately it's a question of CAC and a question of LTV. And, in our case, that equation, works very well. And as we've gotten bigger, we've gotten more reputation, better results, more referrals. We're more trusted. We're known quantity for ambitious families around the world. And that's really made the business work. So I think certainly in the early years, there was some hard wood chopping. And then, we've got to keep our eye on the puck. But we've definitely built a good reputation now in the space. Families know us, trust us, like us, and they can, decide to join us pretty fast.
Yeah. And how do you think about the global kind of like macro, like just college? People feeling that college is not worth the money, like that they spend on it. The college in general, like people are questioning whether there's actually value in a world where again, whereas before, right, maybe in the time that you and I went to school, the internet wasn't what it was. There was no AI, and so you went to most of these places to get information, right? Whereas now, information is freely available, and you're going to these places because connections, because of, I don't know, the more like, so you're not going there to learn the actual information. You're going to network, to meet people, maybe for the brand, right? How do you think about that kind of macro? Does that change how you think about what you're offering? Yeah.
So firstly, I agree that there are many universities in the world that don't add much value relative to their tuition price. And there's like more than 1,000 US universities. Many of them are average. We focus on sending kids to basically the top 100, and in particular the top 30. And these schools have become stronger and stronger and stronger. YU used to admit 40% when I began, now to admit 7%. And the demand for these schools is very strong. And the reason for that is they are like a Y Combinator for human potential, whether it be in law or urban or town planning or architecture. When you go to the Harvard Graduate School of Design, you're around some of the world's best architects, and you build, not only a network, but you're interacting with some of the world's best teachers. You're getting access to these careers, job opportunities. So the network effects within these campuses are really mind-boggling. And an example I'll describe to you is the difference between the market rate for some of these speakers and then the rate they charge the school to be part of it. So let's take someone like Ken Griffin. Ken Griffin, his hourly rate is probably, I don't know, it's probably like $100,000. It's some high number. However, when he comes to Stanford, he does it for free. And he's happy to, partially because of, his desire to give back. It's also kind of prestigious for him to be part of that community. And so many of these guys, they're happy to take basically an effective economic pay cut to be part of this community, this network effect, and then, give back. And so essentially what these universities have created is a world where talent that shouldn't really work for the price they do does. And then you have all these great faculty around you. And there really is this escape velocity of connections and serendipitous opportunity that emerges. The other thing I'd say is people make this argument that, everything's free, information's free, you can learn whatever. I'm actually, doing, I'll give an example of Yale Law School. Theoretically, you could learn all this stuff online, kind of, but actually you can't really. A lot of the content that we're being taught, like from the heads of top law firms about how the business law firms work, you can't actually find online in very good detail. And also as humans, you learn a lot better in this kind of human conversation, and it actually sticks with you in a way that some random online content doesn't. So I actually think even though the content could all be online theoretically in the future, it's still very different to how you consume it, remember it, and engage with it from the in-person interaction. And so I do believe that the in-person class will be way more enduring than anyone probably gives it credit for. So anyway, I don't have to believe that the average university is sustainable, but I do believe
Makes
that
sense.
the top 30 are.
Will AI change that? Like, if you create, and that's already possible now, realistic AI avatars that can talk to you in real time, and engage in the same way that a teacher will engage with you. Does that change in a good way or a bad way? Do you think about that?
I think that hopefully that'll be great, because ultimately only a small number of kids can sit in the Yale Law class and learn from the guy from Wachtell Lipton about corporate litigation. So having these AI teachers is a really good experience. I have a feeling that, through a combination of the motivational effects where you interact with a mentor who makes you want to be better and holds you to more account, with a grading incentive structure and a diploma that means something in a framework where like the jobs at the end of it are very lucrative, that whole structure will be very differentiated compared to like just your AI coach that ultimately will be harder to properly incentivize you to really commit to it. So I think it'll be very enduring, but I'd be delighted if you can replicate that Yale Law School teacher through an AI avatar and that becomes very mainstream. I still think the demand for these skills would be much higher in that world. If anything, in an AI world of abundance, these types of experiences will become more coveted, not less. And you can see that in Manhattan, there's an explosion of these like weird membership clubs. People apply and they sign up and they do the random thing. And they're sort of craving this like exclusive community. So I think if those things are thriving based on very little beyond some, interesting entree in a weird building, these universities that are actually based on a lot of actual value, I think will become more and more desirable. And I see it in Crimson from sort of the world's most prominent business leaders to, first gen college kids from the Maori community in New Zealand. It's a very universal aspiration to go to these places. And I think people love to hate on the universities because most people are getting rejected, but it is fundamentally a very desirable product.
What do you think about how does education kind of fit in a world where, a lot of people prognosticate 40% or 50% or 60% white collar jobs will kind of now be around next, probably over 5-10 years, whatever pick your favorite like prognostication metric, right? Because of AI.
I actually on a call earlier today with the chief economist of OpenAI. It was very interesting. And I asked him this exact question. And I asked him this because a couple of years ago, I asked a mentor of mine, Larry Summers, will AI basically create mass job loss? And what he said is, in every major technology revolution, people are scared of job loss, but the net effect is always job creation. And I do have this feeling that in an AI world, if you have these amazing AI agents, there's still some ratio of human to agent that you need. And I suspect that all this boost in productivity will create an explosion of new types of jobs. And I suspect that overall the amount of net employment will actually go up, not down. It might change the kind of jobs you do, but I have an instinct, just like I find it hard to believe that this is a technology breakthrough so revolutionary that it rewrites all the laws of the economy that have taken place through all previous revolutions. So I'm kind of optimistic that actually there may be some massive job loss of certain types of existing roles, but there will probably be, more stimulating, more interesting jobs in the AI world that we'll be able to look forward to.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's been really great. And yeah, we should definitely do a follow-up. I think we have plenty more questions.
Yeah, so much fun. I really enjoyed it. It was one of my favorite conversations ever. Really
that's awesome.
That's great to hear.
All right, guys. Thanks so much, and have a good one. And I'll see you guys hopefully at some stage in person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jamie.
See you.
Thanks, Jamie.
See you soon. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to TechMates. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with friends. We'll be back soon with more stories of Kiwi and Aussie founders reshaping the future and disrupting down under. Until next time, keep dreaming big and daring to disrupt.